still sleeping too. Good morning, everybody. Let's see what's going on. We have an exam on Tuesday. All right. It is exam 3. One more to go after that. So this third exam, same format as the previous 2. It'll cover chapters 12 through 16. Okay. So it's about the same rough amount of content. Today we're going to be finishing 16 and starting 17. I just want to make that point very clear. It will not cover all of today's material, just through chapter 16. Okay, yes?
Do we need to know any of the RDAs?
Yes, I was getting to that. Thank you. So the question is, we went through a bunch of nutrients, like the minerals and vitamins, and the question always is, what do I need to know from all that stuff, all right? I will not ask you what the RDA, like actual values are, or what the actual upper limit is, or the daily value, or any of that stuff, okay? What I would like to know is when you look through each nutrient, what are the take-home points from that? Is there something unique about, is there a disease associated with it, okay? So let's say we think of calcium. What disease do you think of when you think of calcium deficiency? Osteoporosis, okay? So that is completely fair game. Is there something unique about its metabolism, the way it's absorbed or its availability to the body? Okay, so for calcium, we talked about it having a huge range of variability across foods, bioavailability. So is there something unique about its metabolism? Is it associated with a disease or toxicity? Let's see, what else? Maybe what foods is it in, okay? So we'll stick with the calcium theme here. If I said, okay, I give you a list of 4 different foods, pick which one would probably have the highest calcium. Now, I'm not going to pick ones that are like subtly different. I'm going to probably pick 3 that don't have calcium very much at all and then put milk on there or something like that, okay? So know the main food groups that a nutrient would be in, all right? At least the ones we've talked extensively about. Anything else unique about them? For example, we talked about sodium, okay? Sodium being kind of weird in that most people get too much. So that's the other thing. If I made a point of our society eating way too much of this or being deficient in it, that might be something to note, right? So sodium, of course, being part of salt, we get plenty of that. Whereas some other of the nutrients we talked about, maybe we're not quite meeting them. So those are the types of things. But I'm not going to ask the real detailed things of what is the RDA of this, that type of thing. Okay? Does that make sense? Clear? Fair? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so we got the exam Tuesday. You guys handed in all your assignments now, so you're done with that. And then the final exam, I might as well mention it a little bit. The final exam here is on the 22nd. Okay, and contrary to popular belief, I do not get to decide the time of the final exam. If that was the case, we'd taken it now and be done for the semester. So they schedule it. I don't have any control over it. But I realize it's this year, the way Labor Day ran and the semester starting late, that the exams really bump up close to the holidays. So there's not a lot I can do. If you have to travel far, okay, and you need to get out of here by then, contact me, but I'd really prefer almost everybody. Otherwise, I'm trying to make individual arrangements for everybody in class. So I'd prefer if everybody can take it in that time unless you have some sort of travel plans. But it's just the way it shakes out this year. Not much I can do about it. So, and we'll talk more about the final exam. Again, it's comprehensive, but very big picture type stuff. And we'll spend more time on that coming soon. Also, I believe, have you guys gotten evaluations for the course yet? No. Okay, so I sent out thank you guys for filling out, those that did, the evaluations of Jonathan and Mallory. That was very helpful to them. And you should be getting sometime, I think this week or next, an online evaluation of me in the course, okay? And so please, it's not required that you fill it out, but I ask everyone to do it, okay? This is partly how I get evaluated and what determines my pay and various other things. But it's also, I read through every single one of these, all right, after the semester, usually over the break, find a nice bottle of wine, curl up, read all these very entertaining comments about me. It's very enlightening. But no, I look for themes. If there's certain things you think that you especially like in the class or that you don't like, I want to know about it because I do change this class every year based on feedback. All right? So I'd really appreciate that. Yes?
This is a bit off topic, but what evaluations are the most entertaining for you?
Oh, what evaluations are most entertaining? Just off the wall comments. Sometimes it's really interesting because when you have 160 people, whereas one person's going to say, "Oh, this was great," the other person's going to say that very thing is a weakness or they didn't like it, right? Because everybody has very diverse opinions. But we get all sorts of. It's just entertaining comments. So, like for example, when Mallory was up here lecturing you guys, several of the students commented, "We need more Parks and Rec references," which I thought was really funny because she referenced that TV show. So stuff like that. It's entertaining. But I really do want your candid comments, so I appreciate it. Okay. Any other questions before we finish up this chapter and move forward? All right. So we left off here talking about breastfeeding. So we're going to talk the next chapter about the infant, all right, and the benefits of breastfeeding for the infant. But right now, I want us to think about, and this is an interactive part, I want you guys to tell me, why would you want to breastfeed? What is the benefits of that for the mother specifically? Okay, we know there's huge benefits for the baby, but there's also a lot of benefits for the mother. And what would some of those be? Okay? So I know you guys aren't really thinking about this yet, but it'll creep up on you not too long. You're going to be having kids, and you're going to make this decision. Should I breastfeed? Should I not? And there's a lot of things that are going to factor into that. But from a mother's perspective, why would you want to do this? Yes, ma'am.
Doesn't it decrease breast cancer?
Yeah, so this is one that a lot of people don't realize, but it actually... Why is my pen not writing? Okay. It decreases breast. I can't spell either. And sorry, not uterine, ovarian cancer. Sorry. So there's a very significant reduction in breast and ovarian cancer when you breastfeed. Why is that? We're not 100% sure. It probably has to do with some of the changes in hormones that happen. But this is very, very significant. And this is, considering that breast cancer is one of the leading types of cancer amongst women, that alone should justify it. Okay, what else? Yeah. Does it decrease how less? I think so. The question was, does the length of breastfeeding? I believe so, and I think there's also the number of kids you have. I also think tracks. So if you have one, I have to confirm this, so don't take it in stone. But I'm pretty sure if you have one, your reduction goes down. But if you have 2, 3, 4, there's a continuing reduction in breast cancer. Okay. Now it doesn't go to infinity. If you have 15 kids, that doesn't guarantee you're not going to get breast cancer. But I'm pretty sure that's the way it works. So back to the benefits here. Besides reduction of cancer, what else are the benefits for the mother of breastfeeding? Yeah.
Mother-child bonding.
Yeah, so bonding. I'll just put bonding. And this is really a social thing. This is really... It's important for the mother, which I'll talk about in a minute, certain aspects, but it's also really important for that baby, okay? And making this it's a social bond, I guess I would say. Yeah.
Saving money.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite certain when you guys go to the Walgreens or the Super Target or whatever, you don't go through the infant section, right, and look for the formula. If you would, there'd be something wrong with you. But if you're ever bored and you have time to kill, go check out how much those bottles or those cans of formula cost. They are not cheap. Okay, they are super expensive, and so if you're breastfeeding, that cost is gone. All right. Obviously, you're going to be eating a little more and things like that. But if you look dollar for dollar, breastfeeding is a way more cheaper option than formula. Okay, so that's another one. What else? Yeah.
Doesn't it
So a big one, which we kind of alluded to in class last time with the antibodies in classroom, is, oh, you mean for the mother? Yeah, so, yes, I think, well, let me just put it this way. It decreases risk, not so much for infection for the mother, but it decreases risk of metabolic diseases, okay? So if you have a baby and you do not breastfeed, that doesn't mean your risk goes up. But by breastfeeding, it's going to reduce the risk of things like obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease later on in life, right? Which is an added bonus of all this. And kind of along with this, what do you think, I kind of alluded to this last time, what do you think might be an underlying factor to this? Okay? What do you think would happen? If you're breastfeeding, what is happening to you physically? Yeah. Yeah, you're losing weight. So this is a big one. So remember last time we talked about the average mother should, or the average one gains 25 to 35 pounds during pregnancy. And obviously some of that weight is with the baby and placenta, but a lot of that is actually maternal stores. So the mother putting on fat that she can put into that energy, put into the milk after or when she's lactating. And so that's our body's natural programming. Every animal does this. When they get pregnant, they put on fat. So that, or every mammal, I should say. So when they nurse, they can break down that fat and put the energy in milk. So if you break that pattern, so to speak, then you have this extra 15, 20 pounds or whatever it is on you that's going to be a lot harder to get off, right? And for a lot of people, once they gain that weight, and if they don't breastfeed, then they have another kid, and it builds up, and it can lead to obesity and metabolic disease. So this is a very important thing, okay? And I'll come back to this in a minute, because there's a few other things that tie into this. What else? What else can happen to mothers several weeks out? Think about emotionally after you have a kid. I think I heard a murmur there. Yeah, depression. Okay, your model your model body that you just had like a year ago, all of a sudden has stretch marks and things are not where they're supposed to be, and you have extra fat and all of these things, and you have this baby that's crying and waking you up all night, and life is stressful, and a lot of factors go into this. But postpartum depression is a big problem. Okay, and we know that breastfeeding reduces the risk of becoming postpartum depression, or risk of postpartum depression. Part of this probably contributes to the bonding with the baby. Okay, it's a very rewarding, intimate thing to have that breastfeeding with the baby. But also this may contribute, the weight loss. Okay, I'm losing my weight. I'm feeling better about myself. A lot of things factor into this, but this is a pretty big one. And the other one, which a lot of people maybe won't realize, but you get a quicker recovery. So you just went through the process of delivering this 8-pound baby, okay? And there's some things happen that it takes a while to heal down there, all right? And when you lactate, we talked about those hormones involved in milk. Oxytocin, which is the one that relaxes you and lets the milk down. Oxytocin also relaxes your uterus and your cervix, and it helps the healing process there as well. So the simple process of breastfeeding also helps you heal, okay, your reproductive tract heal. So there's probably more, but these are the big ones. But clearly when you look at these as a whole, I mean, if you can breastfeed, even just for yourself, if you don't care about the kid, okay, which you hopefully you don't, there's a lot of benefits to it. Yes? That's a good question. So if you're pumping, so if you go back, you got the week off or 2 weeks off, and you go back to work and you have to pump, what of these benefits are conveyed? And that's I don't know. I'm sure maybe somebody has looked at that. Very little has been done on that. Okay, but some of these I'm sure are, like the weight loss, I would think would be the same because you're putting the same amount of energy into the milk. But some of these, the bonding's probably going to go away. This I would think would be the same because, just the process of lactation. Dollars were going to be the same, although now you're buying a milk pump. Sounds like you're on a dairy farm here. And hauling your milk around. But some of these other ones, I don't know about like postpartum depression, for example. If breastfeeding conveys the same reduction in this or if pumping does to breastfeeding. I don't know that comparison. That's a really good question, though. I don't know. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. Okay, so that's the end of the chapter. I have a question. It has nothing to do with breastfeeding, but it's 8:20 in the morning, so it has to do with oatmeal, so that's close enough. It says, what makes steel-cut oatmeal the healthier option, and why does it not absorb water as well? So how many of you have had steel-cut oats? Some of you. Okay. So the regular oatmeal we have is like the Quaker oatmeal, the old-looking dude on the big round container we all know. You add some water, you throw it in the microwave, and it's done in a few minutes. Steel-cut oatmeal takes a lot longer to cook, and it has a very different texture, right? And that is in part due to the way it is processed, all right? And so if we look at the comparison, I found this online, which it's pretty true. So this is a rolled oats. This is a typical oatmeal, and this is a steel-cut oats. So the way they make steel-cut oats is they essentially just go in and take your kernel and just chop it, okay? Just chop it in little chunks. Whereas a rolled oat, they roll it, they actually steam it to partially cook it, and then I think they dry it again, and I'm not sure if there's additional steps. But it's a completely different process. Therefore, they did that so this one would actually cook faster, all right? If you look at all of the things here, the differences, there are very, very little differences as far as nutrition. Okay, as far as like total calories are slightly different, but carbs and all of this are pretty much the same. What the difference is here, for the most part, is the rate at which you digest this. Okay, so if this has already been processed, it's been steamed already, partially digested, when you eat it, your body can break it down much faster. All right, the steel cut guy, it's chewier when you eat it because it hasn't been cooked as much. And it takes its slower digestion process. And this is important for that whole thing, glycemic index. Do you guys remember this? When we eat a food, how fast, eat carbohydrates anyway, how fast they get broken down and absorbed. Because what we don't want is to eat something that gets broken down really fast and our blood glucose spikes up and then insulin spikes up. And we think repeatedly doing that is a bad thing. And so what's going to happen here is your steel-cut oats, it's going to have a much slower, more gradual digestion and glucose absorption, okay? So that's probably why it's beneficial, or more beneficial. But if you just look at the nutrient content, it's very, very subtle. I mean, there's almost no differences. It's just the way it's processed, right? They're both better than Pop-Tarts. Okay, so we're done talking about mothers. We don't care about them anymore. So now we're going to talk about infants and growing and developing. So what changes when I grow up? That's a loaded question. If you look, though, and you guys, this should be pretty obvious for all of you. As you grow, since you guys have just went through this in the last decade or 2 decades, the rate at which you grow changes a lot. And if you look here, this is the weight gained in pounds per year. So it's not cumulative, so it doesn't just keep going up. This is pounds per year. And so you can see your first year of life it's probably your fastest rate of growth, okay? And that's why the nutritional demands of babies, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, is really, really high. They're plunking on the weight. And then it slows down, and then it peaks up here for girls and here for boys. And why is this? Puberty, that's right. Awkward, your voice changes, hair starts growing in weird places. Yeah, you guys know. But there's a lot of developmental changes going on here, right? Physical growth and various things. Height isn't so much the same. You grow a lot early on, this tapers off, and then once you get to the teenage years, kind of puberty, post-puberty, this really starts to slow down. And we know puberty starts There's actually a question of the day. I'm going to spend some time talking about this. Puberty starts around 10 to 13 for girls and 12 to 15 for boys, but these are pretty variable, and these are changing actually in girls. So we're gonna talk about that. Okay, so from a composition standpoint, so we talked about weight and height. There's a lot of things going on. If you just look at body fat, that first year of life, we see they gain a lot of weight, and a lot of that, I mean, there's muscle, bone development, but a lot of it is fat. They're storing up, okay? And then this can change, and typically, this kind of fluctuates throughout the first years of life, but the big difference here is when we go through adolescence or puberty is where males usually lose their body fat. That's the big time, okay? You go through puberty, testosterone kicks in, and what testosterone does is it tells our body to grow and build muscle. Okay? And at the same time, we reduce body fat. So this is typically what happens for boys. For girls, it doesn't. As you go through puberty, you don't necessarily get leaner. And as I mentioned earlier, I showed that little picture, or yesterday, or 2 days ago, of the development, how babies are so head heavy. And that's because most of your brain is developed by age 2. Okay? And the growing is done by age 6 to 10. So most of that development is when you're a very little infant. And then you can see some of these other things, and obviously I'm not going to spend too much time on those. So you've all probably seen this when you guys were little kids. They went into the doctor and they plotted you on a chart, and you could feel adequate or inadequate or whatever it is. We compare each self to one another. And the simple point of doing this is to make sure people are growing within a normal rate. Now, we know there's a lot of variability in here, okay? I am a perfect example of this. So if you see, this is weight here. So 30 pounds you should be hitting when you're about 3 to 4 years of age. I was 30 pounds at 6 months. So I was off. I was like, there was a chart, and then I was like up in orbit. And my daughter was the exact same way. So there's a huge genetic component of this. That doesn't mean if you start off high or low that you're going to be destined to keep that trajectory. If my trajectory would have kept, I would not be able to fit in this room. But for whatever reasons, people can be sick, diet, a lot of things factor in. But they do this just to kind of keep an eye on where you're tracking, okay? And again, nutrition clearly can be a component of this, but there are many other things. Okay, so nutrient needs for growth. So what this graph shows, it says nutrient needs as a percent of adult male requirement. So if you're 100%, that means, so let's take energy here. Okay, so this is a male teenage, this is how much you need. So an infant at 4 months needs about 1/4 of the energy as a adult male. Okay? What I want to point out to you here is, especially vitamin D. Vitamin D is the one I really want to highlight. You have huge vitamin D requirements here. So if you're an infant, you actually need more vitamin D in your diet than an adult male. All right? Why would this be? Bone, okay? Bone. And you see this stays pretty high because there's a lot of bone growth throughout here. Okay, we saw the height thing grows. It's pretty high. Go back here early on. But then it kind of continues for a long time. And that's part of it can be observed here. So vitamin D is the one where there's really elevated requirements. But you can see some of these other ones that we've talked about are important as well. But vitamin D is the one I really want to point out. Okay, so we're going to go through a few of these. Again, you don't have to know the details so much on these, but I think it's important that we go through them because they are kind of the major ones. So infants need, if you look on a pound per pound basis, infants need a lot more energy. Okay, about 2 to 4 times that of an adult for a pound basis. Part of this is growth, but I have the Y here is also as infants have a lot more energy loss. So if you guys remember when we talked about getting energy from food, we get about roughly 40% we capture as energy and 60% is heat, right? And that heat keeps our body temperature. Well, a baby has, given their weight, they have a lot of surface area. This is true for any small object compared to some big object. All right? So if you take a big beach ball and you would divide that up into 100 baseballs, those baseballs have a lot more surface area. As you go smaller, it's more surface area per volume. And what that means is you have more room for heat loss. So babies lose heat. That's why we're always swaddling them, putting them in blankets. It's because they lose heat. If you lose heat, it means you need more energy to generate heat, all right, to keep your body temperature. So this is part of the reason. It's not just growth, but it's also just maintaining body temperature, all right? They don't have hair on their heads. There's lots of things that contribute to this, but it's the surface area leading to heat loss, which is a big one. Infants need more protein per pound compared to adults, as you would guess. So if you look at breast milk composition, roughly half the calories in breast milk come from fat, okay? And therefore, infants should be getting, and if you look at formula, it's fairly similar. So we're trying ideally to model those formulas that are on the shelf in stores after breast milk. They're not the same, but they do the best they can. So about half should be coming from fat. And again, I'll reiterate this point, which I've said over and over, is that these essential fatty acids are really important. These very long chain ones. We're talking about brain development here, and these are really critical. Your brain is 60% fat, right? Think about that. 60% fat. And these are the primary constituent of it, so you need plenty of those around. And this will decline as you age. And then carbohydrates go up. One of the questions is a debate on is how much fiber do kids need? This is kind of a weird, tricky area because you want to start introducing foods that have high fiber so the kids start learning healthy eating habits. But you're also at a time where they need a lot of energy. And so you don't want to go overboard and like just give your kid a bowl of celery for lunch, right? Because he's probably not going to grow too well. So this is kind of a tricky thing. It's probably exposure, but you probably don't want to overdo the fiber thing in kids because of their high energy needs. Okay, water. Because of this whole surface area thing, not only do you lose heat through that, but you also lose water, okay, through evaporation. And so they have a lot more water loss than the average person on a pound-per-pound basis, okay? And they also, because of this heat loss, they have a higher metabolic rate, which means they're producing more waste products, and so that's why there's more waste as all. When it regards to milk, so again, we've evolved. Most of us are here because at some point we were all breastfed, or their parents were, back generations for thousands of years. Breastfeeding has worked long before formula, and so breast milk or formula should meet all the nutritional needs of the baby. Now, the caveat to this is if you're breastfeeding and you yourself have a crappy diet or you're deficient in certain nutrients, then you need to worry. But the only time you would want to give, and people do this all the time, they make this mistake of saying, oh, it's hot out, I'm going to give my kid, or whatever it may be, I'm going to give him some juice, or I'm going to give him some water, or something like that. And really, really want to avoid that unless under doctor's orders. Usually if that's the case, if it's super hot and they become dehydrated, then usually what they'll do is give them electrolytes. So it's kind of like Gatorade for kids type of thing. So it brings their electrolytes back up to speed. But avoid, and we'll talk more about this, avoid giving kids non-milk products, especially that first 6 months or year of life. And this is so common. I know some pediatricians, they come in and people are trying to save money because they're not breastfeeding, they're not giving them formula. And so they're like concocting their own infant food, like, oh, let's add Kool-Aid and something else. And no concept whatsoever. And this is so detrimental to these kids. So something to keep in mind. Okay, iron. So iron is one that, as we've talked about many stages of life, for females, for a variety of things, it's also a tricky one for kids to get enough iron. So babies are born with some iron, but usually this tends to become depleted by, or edge towards depletion by 6 months of age or so. And that's also when doctors start recommending we start introducing some foods with babies. And many of those foods, as you would imagine, are iron fortified for that particular reason. All right? Now, the baby's not going to die if you don't introduce foods from 6 to 12 months, but the iron is one of the main mechanisms or main reasons we want to give them, start introducing foods or supplements perhaps. The other issue is If you're giving them adequate foods, they can get this, but if once they start to get to that 1 or 2 years age and they're starting to eat a wide variety of foods, sometimes iron can be an issue, largely because, we talked about great sources of iron is meat, right? How many 1-year-olds are chewing on a steak? Kind of a problem. It's a physical limitation to eating, meat and certain things. I mean, you can get it, but you have to be careful. So this is something to be aware of. And as we talked about, teenagers susceptible, usually to crappy diets, the whole female thing. And question for you guys, what would iron deficiency cause? Where would you see this? What would happen? You'd become anemic, that's right. Mallory talked a lot about that, iron especially, but lots of different nutrients affect anemia. And anemia is it's also something too, if you're tired all the time, go get some blood work done at the doctor, because anemia can be caused by a lot of different nutrient deficiencies in addition to iron. Sometimes just a few supplements and you can snap back some energy. That or lots of caffeine. Let's see here. Calcium, I'm going to just fly through these pretty quick here. Pretty obvious for the bone development. Fluoride, if you think about this, when you're in those first years of life is when all your teeth are coming in. You're losing teeth are turning over those first 5-10 years of life. And so fluoride's very important to build a strong foundation for teeth. And then zinc, okay? And part of this is a concern of this is that zinc is primarily found in seafoods and meats, and typically kids are not eating those, partly because we don't want allergies, and again, the whole meat thing is the physical capacity of this. But a lot of foods, cereals, things like this are supplemented, so you don't see this as much anymore. Again, I'm going to fly through these. Folate, we talked about, it's not a huge issue. Vitamin D, we talked about the big demand for this, so this is one you have to be careful of, and that's why sometimes people give supplements. And the one vitamin that people often get is when you have a baby someday and they go to the hospital, the first day they do a lot of things. They take that blood prick and check for diseases, those inborn errors of disease. But they usually give them a vitamin K shot right off the bat. It's just kind of standard protocol. And that's, there's very little storage of it. And we also talked about vitamin K being produced by the bacteria. But remember, that bacteria is just slowly starting to develop after birth. And so it's just a good idea to give vitamin K to infants. Okay, so feeding babies. So breastfeeding for a minimum of 6 months is recommended. Now, there's a lot of debate about this. Some people say 6 months is not enough. It should be a year. Some people say it's 2 years. There's a lot of things factor in. There's biological things of this. There's social things. I remember some years ago I was on a bus, and this little girl came up, maybe, I don't know, she had to be in kindergarten. She was talking in full sentences, and just right on the bus, boom, Mom whipped one out, and away she went. So maybe, I don't know, my own personal thing, when you can talk in full sentences, maybe you're a little too old to breastfeed, but whatever works. But there are some social, that's where when you go too long, there can be some social aspects of this that you have to start worrying about. But from a pure health standpoint, at least try and get through that 6 months or a year, okay? What are the nutritional benefits of breastfeeding? Okay, so breastfeeding contains pretty much everything you need, right? We evolved on this. So all of the nutrients you need, the essential fatty acids, the exception of this, again, depending on diet, would be vitamin D, iron, maybe fluoride, especially vitamin D and iron, I would say. Okay, and that's only if the mother's diet is really crappy, is inadequate. The antibody transfer to the baby, okay, so obviously that's important. An important thing is the protein. So a common thing, and this is actually probably what happened to me. So I was not breastfed. I'm giving you guys way too much information, I know. So my mother put me on cow's milk from day one. And I don't know, I'm still alive, so I guess it could have been worse. But the one thing we know about the protein in mother's milk, human breast milk, versus cow's milk is very different. And the breast milk is much more digestible than cow's milk in terms of protein. And this can affect a lot of things. Your gut bacteria can invest in your GI tract health, a lot of things. And so this is why we generally avoid feeding cow's milk to infants, okay? If you can't breastfeed, then we typically go to a formula-based, and then some people who have formula issues can go, there's like soy-based formulas as well, all right? But breast milk is for sure better from a nutrition standpoint, and if you're fed breast milk, we'll talk about this later, but your risk for allergies also goes down. And another thing in breast milk is there's a protein in there that actually helps with the iron absorption. So we talked about iron being important, and this protein actually helps what iron is there being absorbed. As, for example, in formula, it doesn't have this, okay? So they usually just supplement the formula with extra iron to try and increase this. Okay, so what are the health outcomes of breastfeeding for the baby? So we talked about health benefits for the mother, all right? So now I want to flip to the other side and say, okay, the mother is happy now, she's not depressed, she lost all this weight, her risk for disease went down, all of this. And I kind of alluded to a few of these this slide before, but what are the benefits to the baby here? Why would you want? All you guys are going to face this decision someday, breastfeed, and hopefully you have your baby in mind to some degree. Why would you want to do that? What are the benefits for the kid? Yeah. Yeah, so very important one is, whoops. Did I have those in here? Oh, shoot. Sorry, I didn't think I had these in here. Well, I'm gonna do it this way anyway. Okay, so, dang it. Hang on, I'm gonna get this. Increased brain development. So it is a fact that if you look at kids that are breastfed versus kids that are formula fed, and you compare those and you track those out into life, kids that are breastfed on average have a higher IQ than kids that are formula fed. Okay? How many of you are formula fed? I'm just kidding. But this is a fact, yeah.
I do know that people who have a higher socioeconomic status breastfeed more than those.
True, absolutely.
So could that...
So social economic status, definitely education levels, there's a lot of things that factor in the decision to breastfeed, but even when you control for those and you remove those, breastfeeding still, and a lot of people have looked at this, and a big part of this is that it's these essential fatty acids I talked about, these long-chain fatty acids, and over time we figured out that this was a big factor, and so now most of those formulas, and I'll show you a picture here in a few minutes, actually supplement the formula with these long-chain fatty acids. And that has helped reduce that IQ gap or that learning gap, but formula is still not breast milk, okay? It's good, but it's still not the same. So brain development, what else? Yeah, so immune system is a big one. We talked about that. Increase immunity, so that's a very important one. Remember, that's what the baby's getting. We talked about the colostrum in day one, but those antibodies still are in milk at later times, just not as much. So keeping that breastfeeding is important. What else? So we've got a kid that hopefully is going to be smarter, hopefully have a stronger immune system. What else? That's it? Yeah.
Reduction of allergies?
Yeah, so that's a big one. So they're going to have reduced allergies, partly because of the immunity, but partly because you're not exposing them. If you're breastfeeding them, you're not exposing them to some of the other foods that they might be exposed to if they're eating non-breast milk, essentially. Okay, the peanuts, things like this. Yeah.
If the mother is eating things like, say, peanuts, and she's breastfeeding, does that factor into
It can. It can. There's a lot of things that factor into this, but they generally recommend trying to avoid some of these really allergic things like peanuts, for example, or nuts. Some of the other things aren't quite as bad, like soy and some of those things aren't quite as bad. But again, all of these things, it's certain proteins that are produced or broken down from peanuts, for example, that could be transferred into the milk. And it's probably that certain ones like soy proteins aren't transferred in as readily, perhaps. But it depends on it. But generally, the recommendation is kind of leave those on the side for a little while. So, yeah. What else? Brain development, immunity, allergies. We talked about the mother when she breastfeeds, about her risk for disease later in life going down. What do you think happens to the baby's risk for metabolic diseases? It goes down a lot. Very, very significant. So if you look at babies that are breastfed, they have less incidence of metabolic diseases. Okay? So babies that are breastfed are less likely to become obese, less likely to have diabetes. I don't know about cancer per se, but cardiovascular disease, some of these major things, stroke, hypertension, a variety of these things. A few others that maybe aren't as apparent are, I will just say, oral development. So there's something about the nursing process that is really healthy for the development of the gums and jaw and teeth of that infant. And if you think about it too, when you breastfeed, well, let me just go into the next one because these kind of tie together. The other one is eating habits. Okay, when you breastfeed, because I have extensive experience with this, when you breastfeed, there's a lot of moving parts here. The baby has to be hungry, the mother has to let down the milk, the supply has to match the demand. But babies, we know, have a much more controlled eating pattern when they're breastfed. If you give them a bottle, babies, not always, but can or tend to overeat more. And a lot of people do it too, is when the baby not falling asleep, so you prop up the bottle in the crib and they've got that bottle sitting there, so they're kind of nursing it, they're falling asleep, and the milk's just kind of sitting in their mouth. What do you think's happening as that milk's sitting in their mouth? All the bacteria are just feeding on it, going nuts, causing cavities, all sorts of things, causing all sorts of issues. So we know this is a problem. So for both the mouth development and proper eating habits, which probably also contribute to the risk for metabolic disease later in life, are also a benefit for the baby. And there's others here as well. Let's see here. Okay, so feeding formula. As I mentioned, if you look at some of the formulas now, where can I see it over here? It's hard to see. You can see it's supplemented with iron. It's small to see up here, but it says supplemented with the fatty acids. I think it's down here. It's more. It's really can't see down here. But the infant formulas say it's supplemented with DHA and ARA. I don't know if you can read that. But those are these long-chain essential fatty acids that they're talking about. And almost all of them have it in here. Okay? So again, if you can't do breast milk, do formula. If you can't do formula, figure out a different type of formula. But don't do some sort of homemade thing, because it's not going to work. And there is, we make these based on human milk, but there's a lot of things in human milk we're still discovering that are there that are not replicated in formula, and that's probably what's different. I'll talk about that here in a second, right here. So question of the day. A very long one, okay? My sister-in-law gave birth to a beautiful little girl. She's breastfeeding, and she stopped because it's hard on her physically and mentally. Very true, okay? This is a very demanding thing. She is a nurse and nervous about pumping when she gets back to work in a few weeks. She was researching about formula. She came up with Infamil, and basically wants to know is there anything about Infamil? Is this the best formula for my niece? Or should I push my sister-in-law to keep breastfeeding? So let me go back and talk about maybe some of the differences here between breast milk and formula. And clearly going back to work when you're breastfeeding is a pain, all right? It's a hassle in so many ways. But this is just going back to this theme we keep talking about of gut bacteria. They look at newborn kids that were either breastfed, okay, or formula fed. And you can see, just looking at, this is one bacteria that is known to have a pretty big role, and they looked at a variety of different bacteria. You can see how very, very different they are in formula feeding and breastfeeding. And we know this. If you look, and I mentioned this already in class, if you look at the bacteria in a kid's guts, even when they're an adult, you can kind of go back and trace who was breastfed and who was formula fed. Okay? Why is this? There is now recognized to be certain sugars in human milk, not ones we think of like lactose, but other more complicated ones, some oligosaccharides, we would call them, that certain bacterial species that we want around really like these sugars. So basically, breast milk is selectively feeding a population of good bacteria in your gut. Okay? And so right now, scientists are trying to figure out what those sugars are so we can introduce them in formula for the people that can't breastfeed. But it's a really, this whole area, as we talked about gut bacteria, is really interesting. It's such a critical window for the baby because not only are you developing the bacteria in your gut, you're developing your immune system, and breast milk is really the foundation of all of that. Okay? Any questions on this? So back to this person's question. I mean, it's up to her sister-in-law, obviously, what she does here, but when you think about the long-term consequences, long-term impact on your own baby, which you can't really appreciate until you have your own, I think you would look back and say, I'd rather sacrifice 3 months or 6 months, make my life a little bit more chaotic, because once you're going to have kids, it's going to be chaotic anyway, more chaotic than risk having some long-term negative health effect. So not that formula is going to have a negative health effect, but we know breastfeeding is better, period. So any questions? Comments? How many of you, just out of curiosity, how many do you know, let me ask this way, how many of you formula fed, if you don't mind my asking? So a few. Most were breastfed. Okay. It's funny, the stigma about this, when I was born, like, it was the thing, breastfeeding was not cool anymore, so people just didn't do it. But now, obviously, we understand the health benefits, and more people are doing it. But it depends on cultural, where you're from. A lot of different things factor into it. There's also I think I mentioned this in class, the breastfeeding clubs, right? Where mothers get together and swap babies. You guys not heard of this? What? Get out. I know some of you guys don't know. Yeah. So this is, I won't say it's common, but a group of mothers, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, will get together and they'll nurse each other's babies. Why would you do this? People are shaking their head like, what? They don't share husbands, okay? It's just the babies. Why would you do this? What would be a benefit of doing this? Yeah. Yeah, better immune system. If you're a baby, so when I was born, well, my mother didn't breastfeed me, I can't use that example. Okay, so somebody has a baby, the immunity they're transferring to that baby is basically what their body has been exposed to, right? We develop immunity based on what we're exposed to. That's why we get a vaccine every year, or we get the flu. We cannot get that same flu strain twice because we develop immunity to it. So once we are exposed to something, we're protected against it. And so we transfer what we're protected to against that baby. But if you have 5 other mothers that have been exposed to different things, your baby's immunity just broadened quite a bit, right? Now their immunity is what all 6 of these mothers have been exposed to. What do you guys think? Is that kind of weird? How many of you would do it? A few of you. No. One guy like that. That's good. But you see this. It happens. I mean, there's obviously, as I saw many of your faces, like, what? There's a social stigma with this. It's like first of all, it's my boobs, but also it's my baby. I don't want my baby. It just seems weird because you have this mother-baby bond, and all of a sudden I don't know, just, yeah. Anyway, but there are biological reasons for people doing this. Okay, so there you go. There's your conversation piece over dinner tonight. The other thing, not to get totally gross out, but another thing that, you see, and I wouldn't call it common by any means, is so when you give birth, the baby comes out, obviously, but then shortly after, what else comes out? The placenta. What do you do with the placenta? Throw it away, right? Well, there are places where they actually, I know it's early, there are places where they actually consume their own placenta, okay? If you think about a wild animal, think about a dog, a wolf, anything in the wild, the mothers, once delivering to their baby, eat their own placenta. Why is that? Because it tastes good? I don't think so. But part of it is if you're out in the wild and you do this, so some animal can't hunt you down, all right? Because they'll sense that, they'll smell it, they'll know a baby was born or something. But there's also I don't know how hard the science is on this, but there's anecdotal evidence that there's medicinal properties of eating that placenta that help the mother heal. And you can see there's recipes online. There are chefs that make placenta that you can hire if you have enough money and you're into this. You can hire a chef that will take your placenta, will cook it up in any one of 20 different ways, and you can have it for lunch the next day. Kind of freaky. I mean, you think about it, but people are doing this. So there you go. Now I've totally grossed you guys out. All right. So how many of you have ever taken care of babies? Yeah, a bunch of you. So they're pretty high maintenance little guys, right? So when they're starting out, and I'm not going to dwell on this stuff too much, but they're pretty small and they have this high energetic demand, so you have to feed them. They don't eat 3 squares a day, okay? So it's, and this is something, you can read these in books and everything, but once you have kids, it's just something you experience and you figure out pretty fast. But a meal frequency is quite a bit. The one thing that is a tricky thing is to figuring out, is to prevent overfeeding. And so when you have a baby born, its only way of communicating with you is screaming at you, right? That's it. That can mean I'm pissed off because my diaper's full. It can mean I'm pissed off because I'm hungry. It means I'm sick. It means I don't like my bed. Whatever, okay? You have to interpret, okay, what it wants. And so the default mechanism for most parents, baby's crying, give it a bottle or give it the breast, right? And often you can't force, but if you keep doing that, that can lead to overfeeding, especially grandparents around, oh, baby's crying, give it more food, give it more food. This is something you have to worry about and something you need to be concerned. And this is very different for every baby, and it's just something you kind of have to work through. But this can be kind of the foundation of leading to obesity at some degree as well. You can see they poop a lot, blah, 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 burp a lot. Another thing, very important point actually, not so much related to nutrition, is now that we've figured out this whole sudden infant death syndrome, and we typically, back decades ago, babies were placed on their stomach or back, and now we realize that placing babies on their back greatly reduces this sudden infant death syndrome. So that's something that should be followed. Feeding babies, again, I'm not going to go through this. This is more FYI, and when the day comes when you guys want to have kids, you're going to get an extensive list of this as you go through prenatal care and meetings and doctor visits and all this. Yeah?
I had a cousin that when she was really small, her nickname was Don't Say Ruby because she would burp up so much.
Yeah.
Is that a sign that she's been fed too much?
So this is, yeah, so the question is regarding infants that burp a lot and actually, I don't know if I'd say throw, we call, what's the term they use? Not throw up, spit up. I was fortunate, my kids were not that way, but I had a friend that kid basically walked around with a bib on constantly. Because they would feed it, and the kid would spit up all the time. And I'm not an expert on this, but from what I understand about it, it's just some kids are that way, and they grow out of it. That doesn't mean they're going to have some sort of projectile vomit issue the rest of their life, which is good. But it's just some people have it. I don't actually know. I don't know if anybody knows. Maybe they do, but I surely don't, of what triggers this, or if there's some underlying factor that causes. I don't think we know. Yeah.
My son actually did that. He used to, it was really terrifying.
Yeah.
He would almost spit up just about everything we gave him. And the doctor said that some kids don't develop something in your esophagus or something that prevents
The epiglottis, maybe that little switch. Yeah, that could be. So it could be a developmental thing.
that later than others.
Yeah. Okay. That could be it. So the comment was that we're talking to your pediatrician. He had mentioned that basically your development of either your epiglottis or your swallowing reflex or whatever it may be slower in some kids than others, and this may prevent the spitting up or regulate spitting up. So that could be a contributing factor as well. Yes.
Like one of my teachers in high school, her son, like it developed like the sphincter, like in his stomach.
Oh. I was gonna say there's a lot of sphincters. Make sure you specify.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so like they like went in and did like a surgery and like put like one of like you know like your steak like your pipe and your steak
Mhm.
one of those like
So it went.
for the rest of his life.
Wow. Okay, so the comment was somebody had, I assume it's the sphincter connecting your stomach to your esophagus, that was malfunctional. And so he had that constant flux back up. And the other thing you have to worry about if this happens too much is, remember, like heartburn, you get the acid going up. And so if you do this too much, there could be some chronic esophagus damage, burning. But yeah, I haven't heard of anybody that severe where they actually have to go in and do surgical, but I mean, anything's possible. But it's scary. So a couple things regarding preparing bottles here, or a few things. So one thing is, again, if you're pumping milk, you can store breast milk. Okay, it stores really well. You can keep it in the fridge for a day or two, and you can freeze it. Okay, it freezes great. You can have little breast milk popsicles. They're awesome. What you don't want to do is you don't want to microwave it, okay, or mix it with formula. This one is especially common, okay? You don't want to microwave it because that microwave can screw up those antibodies in there, which is a concern, all right? So we want to usually just warm it with water, and they have all sorts of these little gadgety water thingy warmers. You push a button and it gets to the right temperature. And, okay. So we're through the breastfeeding stage, or we're waning down in the breastfeeding stage. So we're going to talk about introducing solid foods. So if any of you have ever fed an infant, it is an absolute experience. Usually it looks something like this. The first few times, like days, weeks, even months, I mean, they have this tongue reflex. So you try and put a spoon in, and it's like back out. Okay? They do not know how to swallow. They do not know how to do this. So you have to teach them. And hopefully over time that you get more in than out, but it takes a while. I still know adults like this. I shouldn't, but I have a colleague in Boston. I shouldn't say this, but another buddy of mine in St. Louis. Every time we see this guy at a meeting, we take a picture of him eating. Like we go out for dinner, and he's kind of a friend, but he's like Cookie Monster. You know Cookie Monster when he eats cookies? It's like most of it comes back out. You could draw about a 2-foot ring around him, and there is just food everywhere. And the best was my buddy took him to an Italian restaurant. He had white tablecloths. He had a white shirt on, and he ordered a thing of pasta. And so my buddy sent me this picture, and it was like this. I mean, it's just red. It looked like someone had tried to murder him. So, I mean, there are adults that way too. But anyway, I don't know if they necessarily started out this bad, but some people just never develop. So, when should you use solid food? So what are the factors that influence when we want to start giving them cereal and things like this? So it's nutritional needs, and as I mentioned, 6 months is usually the point here where the doctor is going to start saying, okay, you know, iron, some of these things are going down. We want to start introducing them to foods so that we can eventually get them off of breast milk. There's physiological capabilities. Again, it's this ability to keep the food down, to digest the food. And then there's also physical, okay? If anybody's been around newborn babies, they're like little bobbleheads, right? You have to hold their head up and they kind of, do this thing, right? Well, how are you supposed to try and feed a baby when they're sitting in a high chair and their head keeps like doing this, right? So they have to be able to physically hold their head up. They have to physically be able to swallow, and as the food gets a little more texture to it, to chew it. Okay, so there's a lot of factors that go into this. I'm not going to go into this. This is kind of more for information. It's hopefully some common sense here about issues about feeding, like a variety of foods, choose healthy foods, reduce sugars, reduce sodium, and find foods containing some of the things we talked about, like iron, zinc, vitamin D, calcium. All right. The one thing that's really important when you're doing this, so babies respond very, very differently to foods. And if anybody's ever fed babies, it's very entertaining. You give them the spoonful of whatever, and sometimes it's elation, and sometimes it's like you just fed them dog poop, right? And their response is very different. Their taste, but also one of the things that can happen is when you give babies food, they can have an allergic reaction to it, or not respond so favorably to it. Break out in hives, whatever it may be. And if you give them 3 foods at once, how do you know which one it was? So it's really important when you're introducing to start with something, go with it for a few days, and then if things look good, then you can start introducing something else. But do it one at a time, all right? And usually when you're starting off, use like the fortified cereals, like rice cereal and things like this are the most common, and pureed fruits. Now, you can go to the grocery store and buy Gerbers and all these little things. Everybody ever tried those, like, in recent memory? How'd they taste? Yeah, they're horrible. You taste them and you're like, you want me to feed this to my kid? They're bad. So, I mean, they taste bad. Kids don't know the difference, though. So you can feed them that. I'm not going to tell you not to, but most of these things are pretty simple. So I'm just giving you an example, not that I'm a model parent by any means of the stretch of the imagination, but pureed fruits and vegetables, you take some squash, you steam it, and what I did is we just put it in ice cube trays and froze it. Then the kid's ready, you pop it out, and then if they don't eat it, it's pretty good because you can finish it off. It actually tastes good. It tastes like squash, right? Or prunes or pears or whatever fruit you're doing. Just do it yourself. It takes a little extra time, but it's way better. It's probably way more fresh. And I didn't do the analysis, but I would say probably more nutritious as well. I don't know. But if you taste some of those, you would never feed them to your children if you love them whatsoever. The other things you want to avoid is, again, the allergenic foods. All right, so when you're a baby, you're just starting to introduce things. You don't start, hey, here's a peanut. Some of these things you want to avoid. Yeah, question.
Do you have a theory on why there has been an increase in allergies for why do you think?
So why the increase in allergies? I think most people. Yeah, so there has been an increase in allergies. I think 2 things. One, a little bit more diagnosis, but the other thing is most people have put their money on the antibiotic thing. If you look at antibiotic use over the last few decades, that tracks pretty closely with increased risk of allergies. And this is, again, an allergy, sure, the allergic food or allergenic food has to be present, but it's really your body's response to it. And what largely dictates your body's response is your immune system. And your immune system is they're intertwined with your gut bacteria. Okay? And so the antibiotics we talked about, wiping out, changing your population, this affects development of the immune system. And we know, you can track this. The more antibiotic courses as a kid, the more likely you are to have food allergies. That's a good question. So if the mother has had antibiotic use, so the question is if the mother has had antibiotic use, for example, during pregnancy, will that affect the baby? So the antibiotics during pregnancy won't directly affect the baby, but what could happen is those antibiotics could change, for example, I don't know the effects. It depends on the antibiotic, I guess. If it could affect, for example, the vaginal bacteria, which is where the baby's first exposure of bacteria come from. We talked about that, right? The natural versus C-section delivery and how that kind of programs the bacteria of the baby. So that way is possible. I don't think an antibiotic would affect breast milk composition, things like that, but that's the only way I could think of. But I'm not sure if anyone's done those type of studies. It's a good question, though. Okay. Yeah, and avoid sweet, salty foods, things like this. And then the target currently is, depending on your pediatrician, is generally 18 months of age. They should be on food. So they should be weaned off a bottle. Again, this is more for your reference. I'm not going to go through this. It's just some tips as you go. And, of course, you guys are all going to get a list of this as you progress towards this stage in your life. So, as you know, as like many adults are, children are even more so very erratic eaters, all right? There are days they love something, and then 2 weeks later, whatever it is, they don't like it anymore, okay? And who knows what it is. So it's a challenge, feeding. I mean, especially in today's culture, because it's so easy, or today's society, it's so easy to just pick up something easy. Go to the store, pick up some fast food, something easy. But if you think about this, you're really, all of these habits they're developing in those first years really puts them on a trajectory later in life. And if you start with bad eating habits early on, it's really, really hard to change that behavior and reverse that. All right? So, something to keep in mind. And we as parents don't necessarily do a good job of that. You think about this. How many of you have ever heard your parents say to you, oh, if you finish your plate, you get dessert? Most of you, I would guess, right? You see this commonly done. If you think about that, I mean, the parent's intention is to have their kids being a good, healthy eater, right? Eat your vegetables, clean your plate, then you get dessert. But if you really think about it, what you're doing is saying the real treat of this whole thing is dessert. It's sugar. That's what you look forward to. That's what you want. And it's kind of a programming, subliminal programming, if you will, of telling these kids that, dessert is the ultimate outcome. And so maybe later in life they're more likely to develop a sweet tooth, whatever it may be. And so try and avoid that. It's probably not going to work if, say, clean your plate off, you get an extra serving of broccoli. Hey, that might not work, but you got to be creative with some of these things. And another thing I will mention is this exposure early in life. Just exposure is really important for their palate development. If all they're getting is chicken nuggets and fries, when they get to go to college, that's all they're going to eat, all right? So exposing them to different tastes, different flavors, different smells, everything is really important. They may not like it, but just that exposure will really serve them well later on in life. You know what? We're going to stop there. I think we're at a better stopping point. So we're going to stop there. And I will see you all on Tuesday for the exam. Have a fantastic weekend.